will go ahead and call Privileges and Elections Subcommittee number 2 to order. We have one administrative item. It's a bill of a member on the committee, House Bill 174 from Delegate Bloxham.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This bill, although I think it gets to something that we need to talk about, my theory is if you can't raise money within your district, then maybe you shouldn't represent your district. But talking with council, I think there's some constitutional issues, and I asked to strike the bill.
All right, there's been a motion made to strike that bill from the docket. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in, well, no, that's a recorded vote. Members wishing to vote, vote on the electronic voting board.
Stole it.
Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 174 is stricken by a vote of 6-0. All right. So some of our bills, we have several people signed up in the queue, and some we have very few. We'll try to go a minute apiece, and we'll sort of see how far that gets us. We, once again, have this room for an hour. So we'll attempt to start in order here. House Bill 71, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 71. Actually, a very simple bill. It is a bill that essentially says that candidates and committees cannot receive funds from two purportedly regulated monopolies in Virginia. And the principle of the bill is well known to most legislators, and I'm sure most of you sitting here at the dais. And it is that public utilities, such as Dominion and APCO, are supposed to be governed for rate purposes and so forth by the State Corporation Commission, the SEC. Instead, for a growing number of years, the legislature has not only allowed, but has enabled these two companies to circumvent SEC oversight in exchange for or what is viewed as in exchange for robust contributions to legislators' campaign committees. Governor Youngkin has clearly indicated he understands this principle. And while these are great companies, and I would underscore that I say that with no irony, these are two great companies that serve Virginians admirably. They need to be responsible to the State Corporation Commission and not use massive lobbying monies and an enormous lobbying corps, some of whom are seated here, others who are watching on TV, to get what they want from the Assembly. And I have to say, essentially, my complaint is not with these companies, but it is with the legislature allowing it allowing itself to substitute for the State Corporation Commission. We've had an allusion earlier to the Constitution. I am, as a longtime government teacher, not unmindful of the wide scope of the First Amendment, which was intended first and foremost to protect political speech. This is the first bill of its type I've ever carried, and I think only the extenuating circumstances that I have just offered justify this limitation on political speech by these companies. I think it's very important, and that's why I bring it before you today. I think apart from this, we are not doing a full service to our constituents, the ratepayers of Virginia. I hope that you will be willing to look favorably on House Bill 71. Mr. Chairman, that's the gist of the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Ware. Any members of the subcommittee have any questions of Delegate Ware? Is there anyone here in the room who wishes to speak in favor of the bill? I think we have 3 people signed up online. Is Mr. Hopkins online?
He's not present, sir.
Okay. Ms. Turner?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Narissa Turner on behalf of the Virginia Conservation Network, and we support this bill and thank the delegate for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And is Ms. Boyd online?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Delegate Ware, for introducing this bill. The League of Women Voters supports the bill, and which would be the first time that in Virginia that any limitations would be placed on campaign contributions. We believe that any company, including their political committees and PACs, that is closely regulated by laws passed by the General Assembly, such as public service companies, should not be allowed to make campaign contributions to any candidate who, if they win the election, would be charged with making laws directly regulating the company making the contribution. Such restrictions are important to our democracy, as unfettered contributions, particularly to such regulated companies, could create the appearance of undue influence on a candidate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone here in the room who wishes to speak in opposition? Come on up.
I'm shocked, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Nolan with McGuire Woods on behalf of Dominion Energy, and with the utmost respect to the patron, stand to oppose on behalf of Dominion Energy. This committee has had this bill before, although there are some new members to it. And each year we've opposed it at heart because this is banning political speech by two corporations. And when you do that, you elevate the speech of others. And we have always said that if it's the policy choice of this General Assembly to limit campaign contributions, it should be done across the board equally. If that's the case, it should apply to individuals who spend millions of dollars in our campaign cycles, labor unions, other corporations, special interest groups. Now, to draw your attention to the bill itself, because specifically we've heard concerns about the General Assembly and the SEC. This prohibits contributions to any candidate, state or local. It also is effectively a ban on the corporation forming a political action committee. So if it wanted to form a state PAC for its employees to contribute to, which is basically the model that you have at the federal level corporate contributions are prohibited, but corporations can form the PAC, the employees fund them. This bill would prohibit that at the state level. It would also prohibit these companies from providing contributions, let's say, to the Virginia Chamber or to a referendum committee. So why is that important? Because that is at the heart of freedom of association. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would say with regard to the testimony regarding regulation by the SEC, this bill singles out two companies that are regulated by the SEC. It does nothing with regard to other electric utilities that are investor-owned, like Kentucky Utilities in Lee County, gas companies, electric cooperatives. All of those have a regulatory scheme. That's putting aside those with insurance, mortgage companies, banking, some of whom have 80% market share in certain areas of the Commonwealth. Those are not in this bill either. For those reasons, Mr. Chairman, we oppose the bill. Thank you.
You got one more, Delegate Ware.
Okay. Oops, excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, there you go.
Mr. Chairman, Ron Jefferson with Appalachian Power Company. First of all, let me say that Appalachian Power Company is fully regulated by the Commission and goes through a very extensive review every 3 years of its rates. Some of you may not know that Appalachian Power's parent company is American Electric Power. We operate in 11 states. And I thought it would just be helpful here to share with you where these other states are. 7 of them prohibit contributions from any corporation. 3 of them have limits on all corporations. And then we have Virginia that has unlimited for everyone. So I certainly hope you can't support and won't support legislation that just singles out 2 companies. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any additional or final questions of Delegate Ware? Delegate Ware, you want the last word?
I would. A couple things to note. That is quite true. There are only 2 companies out of the many that are regulated by the State Corporation Commission that are included here. I think there's no great mystery as to why that's the case. You probably haven't gotten huge donations, haven't seen them in other people's lists from multitude of other companies that are regulated by the State Corporation Commission for a variety of reasons. And the members of this committee are very familiar with the fact that much of the so-called regulation that applies, particularly to Dominion, has been written. by Dominion in recent years. That makes something of a, I'm inclined to say, a joke of the regulatory oversight of the State Corporation Commission when the regulation has been drawn almost exclusively by the committee or by the entity that is to be regulated. To say that this would outbalance the speech when you look at the numbers that there are, and you can look it up very quickly on VPAP or elsewhere, as to the amount of money that is offered, particularly by the first of the entities that came and testified today. I hope you will look at this and recognize that we're in a very different territory with this legislation and support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Ware. Delegate Williams.
I have a motion when appropriate.
Delegate Sickles, did you want to speak to the bill?
I had a question.
Okay, Delegate Sickles.
Yeah, Delegate Ware, are you saying that the General Assembly should not set any parameters at all, like whether this has to be the lowest price electricity? If we weren't involved at all, would the SEC uses their number one criteria, we want the lowest price energy?
The simplest answer to that question is, of course, no. There are other matters to be considered.
So the follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So we do have a role. We do have a role to kind of set out the larger parameters.
We certainly do. And the question is whether it will be us who take that role, or whether it will be folks drafting the bills on our behalf that we carry.
Delegate Sickles.
This is not a question, but there have been, I think, three kind of major bills since I've been here there have been three major regulatory bills that changed aspects of regulations I've been here. They've never been done by one entity alone. They always have been this big confab of people coming in from all different perspectives. Usually the governor's involved, the attorney general's usually involved. And one of them, we came out of that and was supported by the League of Conservation voters. You know, I like to keep my League of Conservation voters score high, and they were asking us to vote for the bill. Clearly, there was not just one company that came into that thing. I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but that's the way it is done. It's not like they write it exactly like they want it, because you can see what we go in with and what we come out with are very different things, and we get presented a bill. I mean, I've never been involved in one of those negotiations. And some of them were forced by changes in federal law that we had to make changes. So anyway, if you want to see money when you write regulations in the state, look at the casino money that's just flown into this place in the last little bit. We're actually writing those regulations, every little part of it. You know, so anyway.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to I assume there's a couple of questions in there. One is, in regard to the casino money, I don't disagree with the point that the gentleman makes. And I guess I go to the ancient authority here, and it's time to get your own bill when you're talking about casino regulation. And I would say, in regard to this, the gentleman has a point. Certainly the Clean Economy Act was written in a measure outside, but certainly along with those involved. Re-regulation in 2007, probably the most significant one after deregulation in 1998 during my time. There certainly were other cooks in the kitchen, but the chef remained the folks involved most directly, and there is an appropriate level at which they should be involved. But the question is, has it been appropriate on, for example, the so-called rate freeze in 2015 and other major regulatory provisions in regard to these companies? And I think the answer is manifest.
Mr. Chairman, final question.
I'll get Sickles.
Where if we get a bill that comprehensively regulates campaign money, are you going to vote for that too?
Any bill that comes before us, I'd have to see the particulars of. As I said earlier on, I believe the purpose of the First Amendment, as it was originally drafted, had to do with the protection of robust free speech. And the reason that this is the only bill that I've brought in 25 years is because I think that constitutional and fundamental purpose has been thwarted in recent decades.
All right, Delegate Williams.
Again, motion when appropriate. I'd like to move to lay this on the table.
A motion made, properly seconded, to lay House Bill 71 on the table. Members wishing to vote, vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 71 is laid on the table by a vote of 8-0. Thank you, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
House Bill 85, Delegate Anderson.
Good morning, members of Subcommittee. House Bill 85 basically brings the FEC giving limits to Virginia. Title 52 U.S. Code 3116 imposes limits of campaign contribution giving on donors. This bill basically models that $2,900 per person, $5,000 from PACs, $36,000 from any political party, and it deviates slightly on legal funds being able to make to political parties. The federal limits are $109,000. I rate it $25,000. The legal fund for the federal limits are for presidential elections dealing with recounts. So I didn't see a need to bring that much of a limit down to the state level. But here's the reality. As a delegate, you can give me a limited amount of money. If I was running for Congress, the maximum you could give me is $2,900. The voters are sick of it. It breeds a sense of dirtiness to the political process when a donor can make a $390,000 campaign contribution to a delegate's campaign. And that happened this last election cycle. A single donor donated $223,000 to another delegate. Now, is that corrupt? Does that breed something that is nefarious? It sure feels like it to the voters. And so what I'm asking this committee to do is just basically to adopt the campaign finance limits that the federal candidates have to abide by. The bill does a few other things that are somewhat unique to Virginia. It gives a waiver of limits from family members. Obviously, if your family's giving you money, the perception of buying influence is not there. It caps campaign contributions from one campaign committee to another at $100,000. It allows candidates to loan themselves as much money as they would like. And then it puts some criminal penalties on donors who try to skirt the rules. So if it is a inadvertent donation, if I donated $3,500 to a candidate and it was not intentional, it was accidental because it was multiple donations, then I would have to pay the $600 over the additional money over to the literacy fund. But if I intentionally create shell corporations to skirt the rules, it becomes a misdemeanor, and those limits would be double damages to the literacy fund. But ladies and gentlemen, Virginia is the Wild West. It's embarrassing, and as a newcomer to this process, I can tell you that one of the reasons why the Democrat colleague that I replaced is not here is because all I talked about was campaign finance reform. The voters want to talk about it, the voters want it, and I would ask you to report this bill and move it along. Thank you.
All right, any questions of Delegate Anderson? Anyone here in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? All right, I think we have 4 folks signed up online for House Bill 85. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the coordinator for the Virginia chapter of American Promise, and we support this really well-written bill. Last year, we had the most expensive election in Virginia history. Virginia citizens were watching when hundreds of thousands of dollars were transferred by wealthy individuals and corporations into election campaigns of individual Virginia candidates. Just as an example, I gave a new candidate running for office $35. 2 weeks later, an organization gave him $500,000. I was really angry, and I guess you must agree with me also that money coming into campaigns like this does need to be regulated. It's not speech. We perceive it as buying an election. Whether the money comes from the right or left, it undermines our faith in our candidates and legislators. This doesn't happen in 45 other states. Today, you as legislators have the opportunity to put common sense caps on limits. And today you have two great bills before you. You need to decide which of the levels of limitations are reasonable and pass a good governance bill that would be welcomed by the citizens of the Commonwealth. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Mott?
Thank you very much, Jessica Mott from Virginia Chapter American Promise. I agree with everything that Nancy Morgan points out, and I'd like to point out that a recent Watson poll on the public opinion in Virginia noted that 75% of Virginians support creating contribution limits. This is a bipartisan effort, issue, and I hope that the legislature at all the different levels can agree and move forward on this agenda. Thank you very much. And we note that measures to increase campaign finance disclosure, which are being promoted in other bills, will also help to address concerns sometimes raised about limits about the impact of contributions on dark money. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Millhauser?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'll keep my comments brief. My name is Bill Millhauser. I'm a resident of Fairfax County. I totally support this bill, and I thank Delegate Anderson for bringing it forward. I completely agree with everything he laid out in his presentation, and it's time for Virginia to move forward and install reasonable limits on campaign finance donations. Thank you very much for the ability to comment this morning.
Thank you. And Ms. Boyd?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters supports HB 85. We believe the limits in this bill is reasonable. Such restrictions are imposed on candidates who run for office to U.S. Congress already, and such dollar limits help candidates to avoid even the appearance of undue influence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Final questions. Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the patron.
You have the floor.
Delegate Anderson, I do think that this is a good bill and something that I'm inclined to support. However, a question that I may not have heard correctly, would family members have any limitations in giving, or would that be unlimited?
The family limit requirement is outlined 30. And it says that the limits set forth in this section shall not apply to contributions by the candidate's spouse, child, parent, or sibling to the campaign of the candidate. So it would be the immediate family, not cousins, uncles, things like that.
But, so follow-up question.
Delegate Munden King.
Thank you. So the immediate family would be unlimited, but the candidate does have a cap on what they can personally loan to the campaign?
No, the candidate can unlimitedly loan himself or herself as much money as they would want. Okay. It's basically, this is how the federal government, the system does as well. It's basically how whether there's influence, whether people are buying influence. And a candidate's obviously not buying their own influence, and the spouse is not buying their own influence. And so this model's the federal model.
And just a comment, and then I'll pass on. So that gives me a lot of heartburn because for me personally, and I've been through 4 elections in 1 year, wealthy individuals being able to personally fund through themselves and their family really creates a situation where we have a body that is independently wealthy individuals, and we lose the working class vote because they can't compete. And I'm sure you know how expensive and ridiculous the cost of campaigning has become in Virginia. And I think if you have folks who are able to give themselves $2 or $3 million, then it just puts people like me at a disadvantage. So I'll listen to the rest of the discussion, but that part just really, I think, if there were some limits there for that personal giving as well would make me more comfortable.
Delegate King, it is my intention to try to gain as much bipartisan support on this bill as possible, and I would agree to a friendly amendment to delete line 30 and 31 entirely, if that was a motion that you would want to make. The point really here is for me is to get reasonable limits and to get this through the Senate, and so I need bipartisan support, and I would take a friendly amendment if that was your intent.
Thank you. I'll listen to the rest of the discussion, and thank you for being open to that.
All right. Was there anyone in the room who wished to speak in opposition? I neglected to ask that after the online. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking to the bill, and would like to say that I really appreciate this piece of legislation, and I echo a lot of the sentiments here. And I also appreciate your willingness to be flexible to make this something that is a process that's accessible to all. We've all heard, most likely, in our constituents' base that this is an issue for us. One of the things I think is that I just want to echo is that if we really could do the friendly amendment for 30 and 31, I think that will then make it holistic so that it's a level playing field and makes it so that people across socioeconomic levels can participate fully in the process. Thank you.
Delegate Sickles.
Just want a couple technical questions, Mr. Chairman. So, does this go beyond the federal? These numbers are very familiar to me, working in the federal system some, but does it go beyond the federal guidelines in any of these cases, like the $100,000 limitation? I don't recall that in federal law.
Delegate Sickles, that is unique from federal. That is not in the federal guidelines. The giving limits contained in 21 through 27 are there. The reason that I included line 35 to 37 is because I saw in my own election large donors giving money to political candidates, and then those political candidates were giving that money to me. And I don't like that. And I think that if a large company, large donor wants to give me money, they should be giving it directly. And so I put that limit in there because I think this is a unique problem to Virginia. And I think it's necessary to keep that in there.
Follow-up question.
Delegate Sickles.
Did the study commission that was looking into campaign finance over I guess you weren't here, but we had a group this past year that looked into overall campaign finance, and I was wondering if they looked at this particular bill.
I don't know the answer to that.
Delegate Sickles, I'm looking at Delegate Simon. We were both on there. I don't think we took up this specific issue.
Meaning that you did not take up, let's adopt the federal law.
Correct.
Okay.
Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Anderson, I like the thought of the campaign finance reform. One of the difficulties I have representing a very rural, relatively under-economically privileged group is that in a congressional race, there's it's a lot bigger pool with more likelihood of having some people that have the ability to contribute. In my district, I'm really limited. Somebody running in a district like mine, they're limited to the number of individuals that could, contribute to campaigns. I'm wondering if that would be a disadvantage to more economically challenged districts like mine in the future for raising enough money to be able to campaign successfully.
Delegate Waxman, I would say to you this, that it is the perception of voters that very wealthy people are buying elections. And I don't think that it matters your district per se. I think that there is money being poured into multiple people's districts that is installing candidates. And for a district where you might have a lower socioeconomic base, if somebody gives you $50 and then that is eclipsed, as we just heard, by somebody who gave $50,000, then the influence of your constituents are washed out by these large campaign contributions that are coming in. And so I would think it would be even more advantageous for a district that is lower economically based to have campaign contribution limits, to make sure that if somebody gives you $100, that actually means something to you and to them. And so I would hope to have your support for this bill.
Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to strike, to make an amendment to the bill to strike lines 30 to 31.
Been a motion made, properly seconded, to strike lines 30 and 31. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
No. Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Bloxham.
Can we ask counsel if that's constitutional or not? I'm afraid we have an issue with that.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, the Supreme Court in Buckley v. Vallejo has stated that contributions from candidates themselves or from immediate family members are not subject to the kind of influence that would give the government an interest in regulating those contributions. So not allowing family members to give contributions or capping those contributions could be constitutional. It is.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Counsel. I just want to make sure I heard that last part. It's not unconstitutional to strike it. It's permissible, or it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Delegate, it would be by striking it and requiring family members to, or prohibiting family members from giving unlimited contributions, you would be violating the principles set in Buckley v. Vallejo.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Sickles.
You know, I'm really interested in voting for this bill. I'm worried about the technical parts of it. Maybe my vote today for it would be to keep the process going, because I can't say right now that this is perfect. But one thing I know that is different as well in federal law is that $2,900 used to be $2,800, used to be $2,700, used to be $2,600. They have an inflation factor in federal law, and that limit goes up automatically. Here we would just set it at $29 forever, and so as this thing goes through the process, I think if we're going to link it to the federal law, let's link it to the federal law.
I would have no objection to that.
I don't think we could rewrite that here today. That would be a substitute, yeah.
All right, any further questions of Delegate Anderson?
Question for the chairman.
Delegate Bloxham.
So there is a committee that worked this past year on campaign issues, and that committee is still functioning for the year coming up? We have a resolution to keep that committee going. As much as I agree with the intent of this bill, I prefer to let the committee hash it out with the issues that Delegate Sickles talked about. And I would love to see some way to try to restrict out-of-state money also in this. I mean, there are other issues, not just this, that I think we need to discuss. And that would be my motion, is to move this send it to the committee for the summertime work.
Delegate Bloxham, I think probably the appropriate way to do that would be to lay the bill on the table, and then we will, whether by letter or other reference, then I refer that to the I think it's a study commission on campaign finance reform.
Then I so move, Mr. Chairman.
A motion made, properly seconded, to recommend laying House Bill 85 on the table, but referring to the Campaign Finance Reform Committee. Members wishing to vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 85 is laid on the table 8-0 and is headed over to summer study. So
Thank you.
See you in August. All right. We are running just a little behind here, but I think we can catch up because we have two identical bills, Delegate Cherry, 1296, Delegate Simon, 973. I don't know, would you guys like to present that together?
Mr. Chair, I think what will probably happen, having been around here for a little while, is that my bill probably gets incorporated into the majority party member's bill, and so I'm happy to have that happen, and happy to just sort of stand by to answer questions. This is something that, as you know, we worked on extensively over the summer on the Joint Committee to study comprehensive campaign finance. With the bill that you all have before you, I've been putting in something similar for about 8 years. We've had long bills and short bills and medium-sized bills. This bill essentially was drafted mostly to try and appease the Senate. They're the ones who kill it every year. We passed it 100 to nothing out of this body, I think 4 years in a row, twice under Delegate Cole, twice under my name. So it goes back and forth. So it's a bipartisan issue on our side. Essentially what it does is it adopts the federal rules around what constitutes personal use. That usually is the hang-up, is what if I want to have a piece of pizza with my campaign staff and so forth. And the way we answer that is we'll just adopt all the Federal Election Commission case law essentially on this. They answer the questions like this all the time. So that's sort of how we dealt with that. We added a explicit exception for bona fide child care expenses on the campaign trail. Other than that, I don't think it deviates too much from federal law. So with that, I'm happy to stand by and let Delegate Cherry do the heavy lifting on it, since he's going to have to carry it all through the Senate. And if you guys want to move to incorporate mine into his at the appropriate time, I have no objection to that.
Delegate Cherry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity this morning. As Delegate Simon so eloquently stated, this has been a bipartisan bill that has been passed in 2019, 100 to nothing when carried by Delegate Cole when the Republicans were in the majority. It was carried again in 2021 by Delegate Simon with, again, 100 to nothing vote out of our House. So obviously this is a bipartisan issue that has been supported by both majority parties. What we have done, as he said, was take it through the process this past summer to get the Senate on board, to bring some changes and modifications. Their biggest hangup was, what's the enforcement mechanism? And can this be weaponized against a candidate that's trying to run for office and is having to answer all these questions from their political opponent, making spurious accusations and claims that they are not using their campaign finance appropriately. So those safeguards have been put in place. From what we understand, it came through the Senate committees yesterday with a couple minor technical amendments. We're not going to look to incorporate those today. We're going to let it come to crossover, and then we'll worry about that later. But we want to try to keep this in the introduced version clean. And so what you have before you is the bill that basically prohibits the use of personal campaign finance for personal use. That's the simple definition of it, and I'll answer any questions.
All right, any questions of Delegate Cherry? Anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? All right, we'll move over online. House Bill 1296, we have 3 people signed up. Ms. Mott.
Yes, thank you very much. Jessica Mott, Virginia Chapter of American Promise. We support these bills, which both restrict personal use of campaign funds. Virginia is one of only 2 states with no restrictions on the personal use. And a recent poll of the Wasson Center showed that 73% of Virginians support restricting personal use of campaign funds. And this would help assure contributors that their funds are being used for campaign purposes rather than personal enrichment of candidates. And we also commend the reference to the Federal Elections Commission regulations as a source of guidelines. It's high time that Virginia adopts standards that are already in place in other jurisdictions and that reflect the will of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Milhauser.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to commend both the delegates for bringing this bill forward. And I do want to again point out the critical point that Delegate Cherry made. This issue has already gotten bipartisan support in the House over several sessions. It was extensively discussed in the Legislative Study Committee, which met during the summer and fall last year. I think it's time to move forward on this bill and work out these issues. It's time to, to pass this legislation this session and not, as people say, kick the can down the road. Thank you very much for your opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Boyd?
Hello, the League of Women Voters supports both HB 973 and HB 1296. These bills address the League's long-held belief that the personal use of campaign contributions should be disallowed. This change would modernize Virginia laws to reflect similar personal use laws enacted even in 2021 in many other states such as Arkansas, Montana, and West Virginia, as described in a recent National Conference of State Legislatures report. We also appreciate the time that Delegate Simon spent specifically on this issue as he helped lead the joint subcommittee to study comprehensive campaign finance reform. Additionally, we are particularly pleased that the unique nature of child care expenses is addressed in this bill and included in the definition of campaign expenditures. We hope you will consider, however, expanding the rule to include all dependent care expenses, as was done in West Virginia and Vermont. Thank you very much.
And Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just reiterate what everybody has said. This is an important bill that's been pending for years. And as the chair of this committee knows, it was redrafted by the bicameral bipartisan joint subcommittee to address the issues laid out in the Senate floor, pizza consumption perhaps being the exception. It adopts federal standards, and I'd like to emphasize, as my colleague Jessica, the importance of federal standards, because those are the goalpost and the gold standard in terms of this issue. Even corporations look at the federal standards in terms of their corporate policies on using their own funds for personal use. It addresses frivolous complaints, which were a big concern of the legislator, and it moves Virginia forward in terms of good governance legislation. Thanks for both of the delegates for championing this issue.
Thank you. Anyone here in the room in opposition? Delegate Cherry, you have the last word.
I just thank you for the opportunity to come and present this. As we've stated time and again, this has been a bipartisan issue. We would hope that this would come out of committee favorably to the full committee, out of the sub to the full committee, and of course to the floor, where we think it will pass with huge bipartisan support.
All right. So I don't know what the will of the subcommittee is, but mechanically speaking here, we're not really incorporating bills this year. So if we are going to report one, based on what we heard earlier from Delegate Cherry and Delegate Simon, we would report 1296, lay 973 on the table. If we choose to report one, we have a letter from the Speaker that it needs to be referred to appropriations. If we choose to report neither, then we would need to probably lay both of them on the table in a block. So I don't know what everyone wants to do, but we need to do one of those two things.
One question.
Delegate Simon.
I think we put in, I think there's budget amendment language. I don't know if it's attached to either one of the bills or not, or if that matters. I know that there was a fiscal impact, we knew about it. I know that I think my office put in a request for, well, I don't know if it matters, which one goes forward or if it's incorporated or not. I think money's probably up there, but I want to make sure somebody's thinking about that.
Okay. All right. Committee operates by motion. Delegate Williams.
I move to lay both bills on the table.
So there's been a motion made, properly seconded, to recommend laying House Bill 973 and House Bill 1296 on the table. Members wishing to vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. Those two bills are laid on the table by a vote of 5-3. Thank you all. All right, House Bill 575, Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this is a bill that's similar to Delegate Anderson's, so I'll just kind of associate my general sentiments with his and kind of get to the difference and why I think it actually matters. And before I do that, I think one way to note of this is that after we talked about how it's unconstitutional for to put limits on candidates and their spouses, it's also unconstitutional to put total caps on giving, and I believe out-of-state folks as well. And so as long as we're in this kind of Buckley v. Vallejo world, it's really hard to do campaign finance because so much of it is not, you can't regulate, right? And the difference between Delegate Anderson's bill and mine is that my limits are higher. I think his limits are way too low. I think the federal limits are way too low. I think the problem with setting those limits that low is that it distorts both how a candidate acts. It forces them to spend more time fundraising. I think we've probably all heard horror stories from people running for Congress about how all they do is call people for money. It also allows people who can give more to give into to funnel it into dark money, right? And I think one thing, if we do one thing well in Virginia, is that most of the money goes directly to candidates. I think that's a good thing. And so this sets the caps higher. It sets it, let me see, $40,000 for gubernatorial candidate, $30,000 for state senate, $20,000 for House of Delegates, and has similar caps for PACs and political party committees. And the idea is similar to Delegate Anderson's as to why you would want caps, but it sets it higher to try to get the best of both worlds within the world we're in. And so I'll leave it there because I think Delegate Anderson hit a lot of the reasons why you would want these bills.
Any questions of the delegate? Anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? I think we have 3 folks online who are in favor. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Delegate Van Valkenburg for introducing this bill. I just want to say that the issue of Buckley versus Vallejo and the issue of self-funding by candidates can be gotten around. There is a provision in the Illinois law that would allow caps to be lifted in the case of candidates running self-financed candidates. In the subcommittee, joint subcommittee on campaign finance, the National Conference of State Legislators clearly showed that Virginia is a statistical outlier. Van Valkenburg's limits are higher, and while the caps are higher, they're within national norms. Ohio has the highest limits in the country at $14,000. So adopting these caps would not make Virginia a national outlier, and it's indexed to inflation. It also bans corporate contributions. 22 other states, as well as the federal government, since 1907 and Teddy Wilson, banned contribution from corporations. So this provision of the bill is accepted practice. I think that this is a good bill. I think that in the subcommittee, they were presented with information on national norms, on limitations, and I hope we can go ahead with the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Mott?
Yes, thank you very much, Virginia Chapter of American Promise. I would just reiterate that 73% of Virginians support restricting personal use. Sorry, I've got my wrong text. 75% support creating contribution limits. And I hope we can move forward, perhaps with an amendment that adds and addresses the concerns about keeping fair competition when they're in the event of a self-financed candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters supports the bill mostly for the same reasons that we just mentioned with regard to HB 85. We believe the limits in these bills are appropriate. Additionally, as we just mentioned, a number of states already have on their books the limitation or prohibition on corporate contributions, which are included in this particular bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone in the room wish to speak in opposition? All right, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for council. Line 19 and 20, it would appear to be in violation of current, Supreme Court, Buckley versus Vallejo, but a witness said that that's not true. There's a way around that. What is the law on that? No, that for the audience is no person that is not an individual shall make any contribution to any candidate for elected office. Is that constitutional?
Mr. Chair, Delegate, there's no case on point that says that banning, so like the federal government, of course, bans corporate contributions, and that's basically what this does. So yeah, this is legal.
All right, any additional questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move to report the bill.
A motion made, properly seconded to recommend reporting.
Substitute motion.
Delegate Bloxham.
I move to put this in the same process of HB 85, to lay the bill on the table and then to send both of these to the committee this summer to work out the good and the bad of both of these if we could. So I move to lay the bill on the table.
There's been a motion made, properly seconded to recommend laying House Bill 575 on the table and referring to the Joint Committee on Campaign Finance Reform. Members wishing to vote, vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 575 is laid on the table 5-3 and will be headed over to the Joint Committee.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman,
you,
members
Delegate.
of the committee.
The last non-committee member in the room, House Bill 1302, Delegate Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 1302 is fairly straightforward. It comes, I know there's a lot of text, but it is relatively straightforward. It comes out of one of the recommendations from the Joint Committee on Campaign Finance Reform related to disclosure. What it does effectively is say, we're going to keep the same rules in place that exist today for any contributions up to $20,000. It is not a limits bill, and I know we're studying limits bill more intently over the summer based on previous bills that were presented. What it essentially says is, look, if you go over $20,000, you've got to indicate where the money comes from. And so what would happen is if you're thinking about a PAC contribution or corporate contribution or anything that is not a contribution from an individual as defined in the law, a human, what happens is once you reach that $20,000 threshold, whoever is giving you the money will have to indicate like what was the source of the money. And then when you actually do your campaign finance report, you would continue to do it in the same way you do today, but you would essentially list out what they had provided you in terms of the individual donors. It doesn't make a major change to the way we conduct elections today in terms of what it would like to be a candidate. What it does do is provide an incredible amount of transparency as to the source of the money that's flowing into our elections. As we know, on both sides of the aisle, we saw more unattributable money flow into our 2021 elections than had ever been seen in the past. Republican or Democrat, I think we can agree that it is helpful to know who is behind the messages that are being used to both promote and attack candidates. And so this bill is fairly straightforward in allowing us to do that. With that, Mr. Chair, I hope it is the pleasure of the committee to report the bill and look forward to your questions and testimony.
Are there any questions of Delegate Helmer? Anyone in the room wish to speak in favor of the bill? All right, we have three folks online. First up, Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm with American Promise. We support this bill. The sunshine factor, i.e. disclosure of donors to candidates, is recognized even when the Supreme Court in Citizens United, they had an 8-to-1 ruling that as a national best practice. This bill benefits and protects legislators from attack ads from anonymous donors, and it helps voters to understand who is funding candidates. It focuses on transparency going to campaigns and will shed a light on money coming from obscure and shadowy donors. And it was mentioned, as was mentioned, this was discussed extensively in the subcommittee. And in a recent poll, 88% of Virginia voters, irrespective of party, support full disclosure. So we really look forward to having this get out of committee. Thank you very much, and thank you for Delegate Helmer for championing this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Mott?
Yes, I just want to reiterate what Nancy said or agree with it and say that we support this bill, which would increase the disclosure of campaign finance and thereby help curtail dark money. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Boyd?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters strongly supports this bill. We've strongly supported disclosure over the years, and this is an important bill to try to get this through. In particular, we believe that dark money is one of the strongest problems with the current campaign contribution laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone here in the room in opposition? Any last questions of the delegate? Committee operates by motion.
Move
to report.
Who are you calling on?
So there was a motion to report and properly seconded.
I have a substitute motion.
Delegate Williams.
Move to lay this on the table.
All right, been a motion made and properly seconded to lay House Bill 1302 on the table. Members wishing to vote, vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1302 is laid on the table by a vote of 5-3. Thank you, Delegate Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
We are going to move online and take House Bill 524 from Delegate Converse Fowler. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, subcommittee. I know you're saved the best for last, so that way we can quickly, in 3 minutes, pass the bill on. HB 524 is something I've been passionate about since I ran. There's many of us who do not believe that if you regulate a public service corporation that they should not be able to donate. My door is always open. I seek information from all the lobbyists from any corporation. And I hope this bill, because it's wider than Delegate Ware's bill, I hope that it actually does what some of the lobbyists said earlier, and it's more expansive and it covers all the public service corporations, as they indicated earlier wasn't fair because they were just listed. So I hope it's and being one of the most expensive races and spent the most money in the last 3 years, Mr. Chair, or not 3 years, 3 cycles, I do understand the importance of taking some first steps in campaign finance reform. So I hope it's the pleasure of the body to pass the bill along. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any questions of Delegate Converse Fowler? Anyone here in the room wish to speak in favor? I think we have 2 folks online for this one. Ms. Morgan?
Yes, thank you. In the absence of any limitations bill that went through this subcommittee, which levels the playing field, including bans on corporate money, which have been acted by 22 states and the federal government, our group supports the bill. Clearly, as Patron mentions, in both of the bills today, contributions from state-regulated monopolies to legislators who vote on bills influencing these entities is perceived by the public as a conflict of interest. At least 5 states specifically prohibit public utility companies from making contributions to candidates. This includes Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. So there is precedent in applying this type of rule to public utilities in Virginia, and I hope that the subcommittee acts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters strongly supports this bill, much for the same reasons that we just mentioned for HB 71. These restrictions are important to our democracy and to avoid even the appearance of undue influence on a candidate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any last questions of Delegate Converse Fowler? Committee operates by motion.
Move to report.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Williams.
Substitute motion.
Second.
I moved to table, and the second has come from my trigger-happy friend.
All right, it's been a motion made, properly seconded, to recommend laying House Bill 524 on the table. Members wishing to vote, vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 524 is laid on the table by a vote of 6-2. Thank you, Delegate Converse Fowler. Last bill on the docket, House Bill 205, Delegate Waxman. You all may remember we heard this bill here. It had a full and thorough hearing at the time. We added an amendment. The bill went to full committee. The amendment, upon further review, was not acceptable to the patron, so that's been referred back to here. So I think what we need to do to get the bill in its original posture, if I understand the delegate correctly, which is what you would like, then could I ask council to report what that amendment was and then get a motion to strike the appropriate lines?
Mr. Chair, on line 19 of the introduced bill, after prohibit, insert small Romanet 1. And then on line 22 of the introduced bill, after 24.2-701.2, insert or Romanet 2, acceptance of a federal government grant funded in whole or part by donations from private individuals or non-governmental entities.
Okay, so those are the lines that the delegate would like to have stricken. Is there a motion to that effect?
Second.
Motion made, properly seconded to strike those lines in the form of an amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. All right, so the original bill is before us. Delegate Waxman.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, fellow committee members. If what the summary was correct, we were here not long ago in the subcommittee. We accepted a conceptual type of amendment. When we did get that wording back, which was also the wording in the Senate, it really went against the intent of the original bill. What we really want to do is specify that outside money does not come into the electoral process. The existing bill without that amendment does allow government type of grants, which this would be a government grant, so we felt it was already covered in the bill. We did try to modify that language. We went through some different versions of it and kept running into trouble, and we found out that really the cleanest version without running into the trouble was leave the bill like it originally was, and that's what I'm asking this committee to approve.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Delegate. So again, we have heard this bill before. Are there any new questions of Delegate Waxman? All right. Anyone here in the room who has changed their opinion one way or the other on this? I think we do have 4 folks online. We'll go to Chantel Cooper.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I do support this bill. As a Loudoun County citizen, I just support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay Z.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lindsay Zaya. I'm with the Tertium Quids organization. We're a policy advocacy organization. We'd like to express our support for HB 205 as amended. We do support the amendment as well, removing the amendment, and urge you to vote yes. Although it's understandable that private organizations or businesses may want to assist with election administration costs, allowing this practice creates risk and vulnerability in the election system. And if not now, then in the future. In the case that any entity or individual would look to take advantage of the system, this is likely to be found as a weak spot that allows for unfairly influencing elections with minimal effort through private election financing. Please close this loophole now to prevent this from happening. And I ask you to please vote yes on HB 205. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wheeler.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for revisiting this bill. We have discussed many bills that would limit campaign financing this morning, most of which have been tagged to, I would say, small donations, whatever small means. The bill before you now talks about giant corporations giving giant amounts of money, not through the Department of Elections, not through any other grant, but directly to registrars, electoral boards, and localities for the single and sole purpose of influencing elections, and we don't know what that influence may be. This bill would limit any type of private corporate funding going directly to the localities. As you will note from the money that was spent in the past several elections, almost $4 million was given by a private corporation directly to voting offices in Virginia, many of whom have no actual records of how that money was spent and what it was used to do during our elections. We strongly support this. I work with Virginia for Fair Elections. Thank you very much for hearing this bill.
Thank you. And Janet Boyd.
Thank you very much. The League of Women Voters opposes HB 205 in its current form. We do not believe this bill is intended to restrict our volunteer, nonpartisan voter education activities, which are services, but its broad language could be interpreted otherwise. We welcome the opportunity to work with you on specific language if this bill is approved by the subcommittee. Thank you very much.
All right. Are there any final questions of Delegate Waxman?
Second.
Been a motion made, properly seconded, to recommend reporting House Bill 205. Does that need to be as amended, or?
I don't, since we took the amendments off, I don't think it would be as.
Okay. So then, to report House Bill 205 as introduced.
Thank you.
Members wishing to vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 205 is recommended for reporting 5-3. Being no further business before the subcommittee, stand adjourned. Thank you.